Jason, before we get started today, I've been meaning to ask you, did you ever get that $1 million that I wired you? I got that video message from you, and I know you were really desperate for it.
That was not me.
Oh, you're kidding. Of course, we're just teasing. Hi there, I'm Jillian Viner, managing editor of the Tech Journal, and joining us today for a conversation about AI going to the dark side is Insight CISO Jason Rader. Jason, welcome.
Happy to be here.
Paint us the picture. We're in our evil laboratory today. What is the security landscape today? What is happening with AI going to the dark side?
So, the dark side's been there for a while, right? And, the tools that we have as professionals from a cybersecurity perspective are available to the bad guys now. It's ubiquitous. It used to be that it was on the side of big business because we were the only ones that could afford to have the big machines that it required to do the things that we were able to do. And now the bad guys pretty much have the same access. There are some aspects of AI that I predict in the future are going to require these guys, just like Bitcoin mining and those types of things, they're going to need that processing power. But for the most part, they have the ability to do this stuff at will. And if they need more machines, they'll hijack them. They'll steal credit cards and process them the same way. Mm-hmm. But we're on a pretty level playing field as far as the accessibility of the tool sets. But these guys are really determined, and they've got infinite amounts of time to invest. And it's not necessarily our day-to-day job to try to figure out how bad guys are going to use AI, but it is in our best interest to do so.
Now, I was joking with you about getting a video message that looked and sounded like you, but
I get that now.
But what are some of these trends that you're seeing with AI?
I think probably to your earlier point, the mechanisms that they're using are kind of the deep fake type things. Definitely voice fakes and those, and we've seen some really successful campaigns that have been publicized related to that. Yeah. Endeavoring to literally make video avatars with the voices of executives to get on a conference call with other executives and to fool them. Notable things happened in Southeast Asia related to this, where they were able to get transfers of money in very large sums. And that stuff's pretty trivial. I mean, that's not outside the capabilities of your average college student these days. So that's scary. I also think that, one of the biggest vectors from a security perspective right now are still email. So the whole phishing aspect, and they're leveraging AI to create those perfect emails, those believable emails to get into your inbox. I've noticed a giant uptick in the email that's getting into my inbox that looks legit. It used to be no.
Right, really obvious. Yeah. The grammar was weird, yes. Spelling was off.
Well, not just that, but I mean, they've gotten really sophisticated on how they're putting the subject line, like putting different things in there to make me think, oh, is this somebody I forgot about or something I'm supposed to do? And with those aspects, I think they're leveraging AI from that natural language aspect to get in your inbox. And once they're in your inbox and you're like, is this something I should click? It gets really, then there's just a percentage. They're going to win sometime. Mm-hmm. And then it all boils down to what happens after you click the link. We do really, really, I call tough phishing campaigns within our organization to make everybody aware. We get our executives on occasion. We get, we have a pretty high percentage of folks that do click. And when I say high percentage as far as industry norms, but it's because we make ours so very tough, because we want people to be aware of how easy it is to get tricked.
So let's go a little bit deeper on that, because you're really talking about two different things. I wanted to first address the defense, right? The sophistication of these emails is getting higher. It's getting a lot more difficult to spot a fake. So how do you train a workforce to be more cautious with their emails?
So again, awareness, and from all of the AI threat vectors, awareness is going to be key. So making our user base aware that it exists, the deepfake stuff, the voice, the emails getting in your inbox, that awareness campaign is really important. Tailoring it is something that I'm trying to pay more attention to in 2024, tailoring it more specific to our environment and our line of business. A lot of the training that exists out there is kind of generic, and we think it's going to be way more effective if it's more tailored to our own user base, our own environment. So there's that aspect of it, and then there's the phishing tests that we do across the business to let people see, how easy it is to get spoofed or tricked into clicking a link. Old tricks are the best tricks. These AI isn't coming up with net new necessarily attacks. It's just increasing the breadth and the scope of what bad guys can do with the technology. They can look at every, there's all these dumps that you hear about of credentials, of email, of all these things. And when some organization gets hacked, and unfortunately that stuff gets dumped onto the dark web, people grab those repositories of data and parse them with AI, and then they can figure out how people talk and the way that an organization works. I mean, our organization recently acquired another organization, and when those things happen, it presents an opportunity as well where adversaries can say, hey, I'm from the other company you just acquired.
Oh, interesting.
And everybody's going to open those PDF files and those kinds of things because it's a natural aspect of what we do. And so a little bit of human intelligence with AI where they can cast a wide net or a very specific net with very specific knowledge that you can gather. So it's not anything a human couldn't do, but it's something that can be done so much quicker and digest a huge volumes of information that we haven't really had that kind of scale and then focus.
Yeah. I was going to say, one of the things I really appreciate about our email system at Insight is that there's a little banner at the top of your email that says when you get an email that's from outside the organization. But in your example, if someone from, quote unquote, from the company we just acquired, that may not apply, or IT's got to be really quick about those types of banners.
Social engineering is still one of those aspects. And social engineering is hard for people with not the same language that you have. It's way easier if you can have AI generate those responses again. So it is hard. But that banner, not everybody thought that was awesome, but it does help quite a bit for me when I'm looking through, when I've got those funky subject lines that tell me, oh, this isn't somebody that's internal, it's somebody that's external.
Absolutely. So how does AI, particularly generative AI, help CISOs be more proactive about cybersecurity approaches?
It's, kind of back to some stuff we already discussed. It gives you the ability to process so much information and get the tidbits out of it that you need to, act upon, that, that kind of capability wasn't available before. There's some interesting things that we're finding based on compliance, based on contract security, where in the past, if I needed to know, if a vulnerability comes out and I need to know how exposed we are to a vulnerability, and I go to legal and ask them a question about, well, how many contracts do we have that have this component in it that could expose us? That'd take thousands of man hours to actually look through all those contracts. With AI and retrieval augmented generation, we can, boom, go through that stuff super quick and get an answer back, and that is a game changer. So that's just that's an example that's been very meaningful to me as a CISO, but that ability to be more proactive as opposed to reactive, it's, that's our philosophy, is we want to prevent fires, not fight fires. So it allows us to get ahead way more than we were in the past. But again, AI is one of those things that it's not a buzzword, it's a thing, but all AI is not created equal, and just because a product says it has AI in it doesn't necessarily mean it has generative AI, and doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to deliver all the promises that AI is supposed to deliver. So.
I'm glad that you say that, because there's so much buzz right now about AI devices. And there's a lot of confusion about what that really means. But I think there's a lot of optimism too about what AI devices could mean for the workforce from a productivity and even a security standpoint. So what's your take on that? How are AI devices going to help improve security for organizations?
I am all in on AI embedded into the capabilities embedded to devices, endpoint devices.
Why?
First of all, for example, I have a laptop that's got super high-end capabilities from a video card perspective, and that can be used to also run a local language model that I basically can use offline that enhances the privacy of what I'm using it for. Then it gives me immediate response, and I can also customize it with a RAG, the retrieval augmented generation, to answer questions specifically about data that I put into a folder on that laptop. I mean, that's unprecedented. I literally can take whatever data, internal, private, sensitive, whatever, and ask questions about that without it ever leaving that device offline. And that's massive. So just that alone, I'm getting, I've talked to our compliance side of the business. I'm like, we could put all of the responses that we respond to security assessment questionnaires, every response we've ever given and every question that we've ever been asked, we can use that in a repository and ask questions when we're asked new questions to be able to answer those give those responses way quicker. So there's that. There's also, from a XDR perspective, when we're talking about detection and response that spans more than just a single device, we can have on-device capabilities that instantly deal with malware, those kinds of things, but it can also take that telemetry, forward it to a bigger repository, and then we've got just a huge amount of telemetry that we can make choices on, and we can make them assisted by AI. So I'm all in. I don't think that, obviously there's a refresh aspect of it. You're not going to get those capabilities until you have the hardware in place. But even from an IoT perspective, there's all of those things that we were thinking about. IoT was big because we could make decisions closer to where the actual thing was being manifest. And now we can have, if it isn't on device, it's very close or near the device so that we can make those decisions way quicker. And that could be safety, that could be a lot of different things.
So that all sounds well and good, but I think you have to be a little bit of a pessimist, or at least scrutinize things right from a security standpoint. So are there risks involved with using AI in cybersecurity?
1,000%. So I think
Honesty.
I'm a security guy. So trust but verify is a big part of security. And the worst thing, in my opinion, that you can do is kind of, well, let's leave it up to the AI. You've probably heard of the whole hallucination aspect of it, but just if you're trusting AI to do the thing that you would do, you don't know that. There's not that level of transparency in all products unless you build them yourself. But the way that we're leveraging AI-based tools right now in our environment is we think they're fantastic for the ability to document what the analysts are doing, because that's kind of the drudgery of the job, to be honest. Because that's the other thing that the bad guys have in their favor. They can hack all day. They don't have to document what they did. We have to document everything that happens when we see a particular attack or something we think is an attack. We have to document that. We have to say what we did. We have to, if it's a false positive, we have to do those things. And all of that is kind of tedious to analysts who really want to kind of go after the thing and not do the documentation. We're finding that AI is phenomenal, as you're probably aware, kind of leveraging that for different business tasks. It's phenomenal for, following what the analyst did, documenting that, and because otherwise we have to solve that same problem over and over again, which happens. AI is not so awesome about deciding what to do and going and looking in the places and then coming back with a result that it kind of says is positive. We know this is what happened, and then our guys go back and check and like, no, that's not necessarily what happened. So that's just more training. I'm totally confident that it's going to get there, but it's one of those things where I've seen people kind of make the mistake, C-level folks make the mistake of thinking that this is just going to replace their security teams. It's not at that level yet. And I think that trust is a good thing, but that can also kind of mess the market up where they trusted, got burned, and now they're not going to go back for a little while. I definitely think AI is the way to go, but you've got to be able to ingest it in a thoughtful way, test it, and then figure out, exactly, it's got to be part of your business model. What are we trying to accomplish with this? Does it do it? And then also, I think we're in a unique position at Insight because we can partner with the vendors and give them our feedback. And it's been a really great relationship related to that, as it always has been. But from an AI perspective, we leaned in really early on this, and we've had a lot of influence, I think, on the partners.
Yeah. So it sounds like no matter what, consider AI a copilot, an assistant. It's never going to be a replacement, at least not anytime in the near future.
Right now we kind of say that it's, computer assisted, and it'll get to where it's human assisted maybe. But I think it depends on what aspect we're talking about. For example, if we have to write code or a script for something right now, let AI do it, because you can test it. If it works, great. There are those kinds of aspects that I fully expect. That's where, from a dev perspective, AI is revolutionary. And I don't have to figure out whether it's Perl or whether it's some other scripting language or high-level programming language that I have to use. It doesn't matter. If it's in a certain format, AI can understand it. They can even convert it. So that's super great. And that, from hiring somebody like that, that's woo. So the trick is I can get a lot of those benefits, but it's one of those things where as humans, we probably don't give ourselves enough credit, but you can look at something pretty quick if you know what you're doing and figure out whether it's right. I mean, that's where computers can't do that yet. AI can't do that, at least not at a level that's going to be as accessible to folks. I mean, I'm sure there's some governments that have that level, but it hasn't hit us yet.
So another risk that we hear a lot about is something called prompt injection. So for companies who are using AI and building AI models or modifying AI models, how do you protect it from those sorts of risks?
You've got to check for it. I mean, that's basically, so there's all kinds of ways that you've probably heard when they were building some of these models and training them, they were using, there's some famous ones, I won't mention the sites, but they used sites that were kind of social sites where kind of the groups that use those sites weren't necessarily the most PC groups that were out there. And that's where you hear the stories about AI being aggressive or those kinds of things. So guess what? I mean, that definitely can happen when you train those things. There's also the aspect of how these are used. People can misuse technology. And that's literally what hackers do. They misuse technology. So the trick is, like with some of the bigger ones out there, I don't know if I should mention names, but any of the publicly available ones, if you say, hey, write me something that'll hack this, it's going to go, well, I'm an AI and I'm not going to write something that helps hack. Well,
it has a moral code.
Yeah, exactly. It does. And they built that in. But the people are finding ways to get around that by saying, I'm writing a screenplay where there's a hacker and he needs to write. And they're like, oh, well, let me help you right there. And so they'll figure out how to get around the barriers that have been put in place. I mean, that happens quite a bit. I know they're backing it down, which is why you probably heard as well that there are a lot of humans that sit on the back end that are looking at these responses, not in real time, but they're looking at them going, oh, well, that was bad. And then they're trying to capture those prompts and basically take them out of the mix, make it so that it doesn't allow those prompts, so that it doesn't cause that issue. But realize that's because commercial entities want to keep their stuff safe, but somebody who were able to get those models or other models and leverage them for the evil they're trying to do, they could do that.
So you mentioned earlier the benefit of having the on-device AI. All of your data, all of that is kept right there on your device.
Sure.
Does that kind of paint a picture where maybe on-prem becomes cool again, where maybe not everything is pushed out to the cloud?
Well, and from a cool perspective, I thought maybe, do you mean that the data centers are going to be cooler, like less power?
Potentially.
Actually, I think no, they'll swing in the opposite direction. I mean, think about AI, training AI models, huge amounts of processing power, which equals literal power. So we actually talking about sustainability. That's something that we need to pay attention to, not this conversation, but something to think about. But I do think that on-prem is going to be more meaningful to folks. I don't think it's in most organizations' best interest to try to train their own models. They're going to leverage pre-trained models and use them, like I said, in that RAG mechanism with their own data locally, because they don't want to send their own data somewhere. They don't want to train their own model, but they do want to benefit from leveraging their own data. So I definitely think everybody that I'm talking to thinks that's a great idea, which means if you want to deal with the privacy issues or the sensitivity or compliance issues, you're going to do something local. And I think, it can be very specific. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to have this giant data center, but I think there's going to be an interest in purpose-built AI mechanisms that they're going to want to have control over. And maybe that's cloud-based, but either way, it's a consideration a lot of organizations are thinking about. Data estate is another thing that's worthy to talk about. Like, even here, we've got data all over the place. Is it in a great format for us to use for what we're trying to use it for? Not necessarily. We're a 30-year-old company, right? So it's one of those things where a lot of organizations, you can't just immediately say, I bought some AI hardware and I'm ready to rock. You've got to have the right data to feed into it. And then, then you've got to deal with the sensitivity. Data typically, from a compliance perspective, has to be used for the reason that it was collected, if we're talking about data outside the org. So you have a whole bunch of client data, you collected it for a reason, mainly to correspond with your client, and then you're trying to use it for something else. That's not okay in most cases. So it's one of those things where people, just because you can doesn't mean you should or you're allowed to. So it does create a lot of things, but having control over that data and keeping it local kind of keeps you in the most defensible position for leveraging data. How about that?
That makes sense. When we're talking about bringing AI into cybersecurity, what does that look like when you're really bringing the people side along with the AI? How does that change your approach to cybersecurity? How can we work together, bringing people and machines?
Yeah, and there's just as much of a people aspect from a preparation perspective as there is from a data and AI perspective and tool perspective. So, that's something I've really encouraged my team, and we encourage anybody that we talk to. You've got to get your team ready for it. It changes if, like I mentioned earlier, we don't necessarily have to write scripts the way that we used to write scripts anymore because the AI can generate those scripts. but we've got to make the analysts and the individuals using the tech understand how to ask for those things. Just like prompt engineering, there's the way that you used to use Google or search engines to get the results that you want. You've got to know how to ask those questions, and you've got to kind of know how the underlying technology works. It doesn't make somebody magically a cybersecurity professional. They've got to know how things kind of work. And I kind of think of those science fiction shows where like, oh, the unrealistic CSI shows and things like that. We're like, oh, zoom in on that. Oh, well then now correlate that with data from some unknown data source. You've got to know what exists. So I think that the way that you bring AI into the mix is you've got to get all the stuff, which a lot of organizations from a maturity perspective don't get all the stuff because it takes a long time to process that stuff, or it's just another mountain of data that we've got to sift through that doesn't necessarily help us. And there's a certain amount of liability of having all that data that you don't parse that puts you on the hook for if there's a security event and you didn't detect it. Now you've got to say, well, we did have the capability to detect it. We didn't have the right technology or people. So there's that understanding of we've got to get all of the data. We've got to accelerate the processing of that through AI. That's going to be hugely important. And then we've got to have individuals who know how to leverage that to the best use of it, because there's good, better, best. All of it's kind of a good way to use it, but the best way to use it is from somebody who knows how the aspects of cybersecurity work, who knows how the adversaries work. So it takes, I think, it doesn't magically make a level 3 kind of analyst, but the level 1 kind of analyst duties that were kind of the hazing rituals of the cybersecurity. Okay, now go do this and grab all this data. Those things have been elevated to a different level now. And so I literally think you've got to train the people to leverage the tools. You've got to get the tools and mature them within your organization. And the way that all the other devices, logs, elements, threat intelligence, all those things kind of come together, it's not cookie cutter right now. It is still a slog unless you use a platform where all of that's built in. But the larger organizations like us don't have the luxury of using a single platform. We have a lot of different platforms that we've got to balance.
So maybe put that in bullet points for me, or 1, 2, 3. What would be your advice for organizations to integrate artificial intelligence into their cybersecurity? I know you just outlined a bunch of steps.
Sure. Number 1, make sure you're choosing the right platform. Some platforms already have brilliant concepts and AI built into those platforms, and it's probably going to get you there the quickest. Number 2 is training your cybersecurity staff how to leverage the AI, whether it's in a single platform or across multiple platforms. And number 3, and I don't know that these necessarily all happen like in an order, they are all important, but number 3 is understand all of the data points that you're feeding into the environment so that you're getting the broadest coverage. The bad guys know where people are looking, and they're going to leverage techniques to go where you're not looking. Or if we're only looking here, they're going to try to go somewhere else. That's why email always kind of catches most folks off guard, because it's already all the way inside the environment. If somebody clicks in there, it's executing from the context of inside your network, and that kind of throws a lot of people off who invested everything in kind of perimeter-based security.
Email does seem to be the biggie that keeps coming up.
It will continue, and email's not going away.
You're right, we wish sometimes. Is there another common attack surface that usually gets through?
People.
How so?
So, I mean, that's the trick. That's where all the deep fakes and the, voice.
I get a phone call from Joyce.
Yeah.
And it's not actually Joyce.
I mean, well, you've probably gotten the text messages before. We've all gotten them. But now it's legitimate sounding voice calls. And they do this, it's the old tricks are the best tricks, but they're leveraging a new technique to use it. If somebody sounds like Joyce, we're going to believe it's Joyce. And if they've gotten enough of Joyce's voice and her reactions and those kinds of things, it'd be hard. I mean, I joked that maybe all the executives need like a safe word or a code word
password, yeah.
if we're doing something over the phone so that we know it's who we're talking to, because it's that scary.
I mean, it sounds silly, but maybe that's not that crazy advice. I mean, how else are you checking today? How else do you know?
I mean, it's just like I would say to anybody, if somebody calls you at a number, you call them back at a no number. I mean, and that's not AI, that's just kind of training and those kinds of things. But not everybody feels comfortable telling their CEO, I'm going to call you back at the number I have for you, they're going to be like, oh, yes. All of them have some level of urgency, have some, you got to do this now. I know I'm breaking protocol. You know, they work all those things that play on people's emotions, and everybody wants to do a good job for their boss or these people that are in these positions.
Right.
So it's tricky, but
it kind of sounds like there needs to be education even from the top that says, it doesn't matter how urgent I sound or how desperate I sound, you need to validate the request.
Totally right. Any deviation of a standard is a security issue, whether it's on purpose or a bad guy. It's one of those things. Security isn't this rigid thing that means you can't ever do something else. It means that if you do have a deviation, you document it. And then there's some other protocol in which you manage it. So, I mean, security isn't the department of no. It's one of those things that enables and it protects the organization, because when it comes down to it, if you're in a situation where you're in a courtroom and you got to figure out what the liability is, it's almost never going to be 0 or 100%. It's somewhere in the middle. And if you can show that you had the right controls in place, training, all those other things, it's going to make your liability less. I mean, everybody kind of loses in those situations, but it's one of those things where we got to protect our organization appropriately. Has
AI and generative AI changed the role of the CISO?
I think so. Well, I mean, it's, first of all, when it started to become, 2 Novembers ago, when it became everything to everybody, the CTO and I had to totally go out and digest that stuff. I mean, it was one of those things where we had to kind of lead the charge, because general counsel, other folks were like, well, we can't do this until we know it's secure. And since the business wanted to do and leverage this stuff to take market share and do the things, which can't blame them for, we were kind of the folks that sat on that. We had to learn this stuff. So I know more about AI than I ever thought I'd know. We actually have patents because of getting up there so early on it. We filed a lot of provisional patents to keep the other folks from the patent trolls from filing and keeping us from doing what we wanted to do from a business perspective. But it was an interesting thing, and it was super exciting for us because we're technical folks. I think, but there is an expectation of the CISO to understand the tech, because they've got to allow the organization to embrace that tech. So unfortunately, if you're a CISO, you can't kind of outsource this. And to be honest, we had a external firm that came to us when it first came out. Everybody's kind of trying to sell their wares and those things, and said that there's no way to do AI in a secure manner if you want to maintain privacy. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound right. But they were kind of referring to ChatGPT and those types of aspects, which understood and agree. The way that we do it is different here. And so we did a huge amount of due diligence, leveraged a platform that was secure, verified that it was secure by talking to all the engineers to get to that point where we felt very confident and proved to general counsel that it was secure. But a lot of things that weren't on my to-do list the year prior, not thinking that was going to be a thing.
That makes sense. And I hate to ask this, because here at Insight, we love our teammates, we love our culture, and I'm sure most companies feel that way, but insider threats are real.
Absolutely.
Is there a way of protecting or searching for insider threats within an organization, people that might be using the AI tools to do harm?
Absolutely. So, I mean, you can see the requests for external-based, ChatGPT and the like, for those types of queries. We could see those. We actually, before we felt comfortable with people using it, because we wanted to change our policy, we wanted to establish an AI policy to let everybody know what was acceptable internally, we blocked it. It wasn't technically a block. You had to click through it to get to the internet, but it was kind of saying, hey, you're using this, don't use corporate data, that type of stuff. But so the aspect of seeing where people go from a DNS perspective, we could see that pretty easy. The way that we can see if people are using our own internal AI aspects is in the same way. We actually augmented the capabilities that were provided by the provider that we use for our AI so that we could do those checks. It was important because we felt that we didn't want to have anybody on our time leveraging corporate resources to do bad is something that we're liable for. We have to have something in place to be able to check. So absolutely, from an insider threat perspective, not just insiders threatening external organizations, but insiders threatening our own organization is something that is a big deal to us. And also we have obligations to clients and from other aspects of clearances that we have and those types of things where we have to consistently check for those things. So it's something we definitely had to consider. From an AI perspective, less so about the internal aspects, but yeah, somebody could write a script with AI to leverage it internally if they were so inclined. And we've got to make sure that the inside of this perimeter that we have is just as secure as the perimeter.
Yeah. Where do you see the future of AI headed in cybersecurity?
Well, I think that AI is not going away. There'll be this dominance of AI. I do feel that we won't be calling it AI, like AI won't be the thing. AI will be an ingredient in what the security platform is. Because there's already so many times that people say generative AI when they don't mean generative AI or other things like that. So I do believe it'll be an ingredient, but the way that it works and the way that people work with it is going to continue to mature, and it's going to be great. Like I said, we'll probably change from that computer-assisted to human-assisted paradigm, where we've still got to let that massive scale and scope that AI can bring all of that pertinent data and weed it out to make it pertinent data. I mean, we can get a lot of information, and it might all be important information, but it's still a haystack of needles now instead of a needle in a haystack. But now, okay, what do we do with all of this stuff? And that's where AI can really help kind of present the most important thing to our analysts, and that is going to be awesome. I also think that, common ways that security tools exchange that kind of information, because again, if it's not built into a platform, it's usually hard for cross-platform kind of use. Somebody's got to figure something out over here, copy it, paste it, do something over here. That kind of integration is going to be a thing. It has to be, because like I said, AI is not created equal. Just because, my car has AI and then my house has AI, that doesn't mean those guys can talk unless somebody makes an effort to do those things. And then you've got, proprietary systems. Why don't all things talk right now? So we got to make sure that business understands the beautiful aspects that can happen, and the public needs to demand that those things happen. But AI is going to dominate. It's going to continue to be a thing, but it's, at the risk of, just like any other thing, we got to make sure that it remains a standard that everybody can use and everybody can play in. But like I said, from a patent perspective earlier, there's a lot of folks who get in and kind of maintain an edge for themselves, and the people that came in late are kind of left behind.
I agree. I think a lot of us here agree that even though there's so much that's still unknown about AI, it's best to get in now.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. And we're not talking about, the folks that kind of read the papers and see all these startups that are buying $100 million of NVIDIA, GPU processing. I don't think that's not where typical folks have to go. You don't need to train models. And, I can't say that enough. You want to leverage trained models. You want to find the right model. It's very, very rare that somebody's going to need to train their own model. What you want to do is use like the aspects like RAG that I was mentioning before. Those are the things that are really going to get you to the next level. That's going to be a huge aspect to cybersecurity.
So for organizations that are integrating AI into their cybersecurity, how might that influence things like automation or make jobs easier?
Automation is the best part of AI right now from a cybersecurity perspective. It allows us to, leverage AI to deal with the security aspects. But once we figure out a certain attack or a false positive, we can leverage automation to do whatever response that we need when we see this particular event, to log it appropriately, to maybe close ports on firewalls or those kinds of things, send SMS texts to the person on call. All of those things, I think it's hard from an organizational perspective to get to that level, because you have to have processes well defined in order to automate them, and getting them defined, AI can help. And then helping with the automation of going from this platform to another platform to another platform, AI is super robust at. And that's one of the gold nuggets from a security perspective, is leveraging AI for automation.
So paint a picture for me what this looks like in reality. We have the old world of regular devices, no AI in them. We have teams that are doing everything manually, and that's how they're addressing cybersecurity. And now let's fast forward, we'll say maybe 5 years, where all devices have on-device AI, and AI has integrated automation into these processes. What do those two scenes look like? What are the biggest differences?
I think it's scope and scale, right? I've got cameras all around my house. I have to look at them individually, right? It's one of those things where we've got telemetry and things that we can use to detect things, but we have so many of those things. So that's where right now it's impossible. I mean, literally, I've seen organizations where it took 24 hours to process, or 26 hours to process 24 hours worth of logs to check. And now with AI, that's going to get us way past that, because we can get rid of all the chaff, and we could potentially go back days, because a lot of the techniques now is just low and slow, where they'll come in and they'll do different things to escalate privileges or do whatever that they're trying to do, but they make it so not, quiet, if you will, so that they can get out of the alerts that would potentially happen. Well, we can take a look when we're doing threat hunting. We could take a look at what's weird that's been happening over the course of a year. And depending on what kind of adversary you're dealing with, the ransomware guys, they're not going to do it that way, but the nation states, that's how they operate. So those kinds of things, AI really gives us the ability to look at that stuff that we just don't have enough manpower. And nobody's going to ever think it's okay. No board is ever going to approve 200 people to look at logs for a security organization, but they're going to definitely invest in the ability for AI to do that kind of stuff for us. So in 5 years, again, it's going to be people who know how to kind of orchestrate across platforms, deal with that automation aspect and understanding how that automation works. It's going to be a hybrid of the cybersecurity professionals today. There's probably going to be more general knowledge across the board than more specific system knowledge. It's a guess, but I would say because AI can bring a lot of that knowledge to make a generalist pretty powerful, I mean, that's great. But that's also where that experience of understanding how the full platform,
ecosystem,
that's the word, ecosystem, the full ecosystem works, is going to be really important for that, because you can't really leverage that with AI. It's got to be somebody who kind of understands how that works. So I literally think the cybersecurity professionals are going to have to step their game up, understand more than just kind of a very, very specific part of their job.
Does AI give you more anxiety or less anxiety about security?
It makes me more comfortable, if you will.
Okay.
I think knowledge is power, right? So understanding how AI can be used, just like guns are bad, we know how guns work. We know what the threat is with those. We know where they can be used against us, and we also know how to defend against them. And we have checks and regulations in place to keep that. All of that stuff's going to pretty much apply to AI, right? We've got to use it responsibly. There's potentially government is going to have a certain amount of regulatory over it. There's all of those things that are being put in place but I think the fact that we know how it works, we know how to use it, we know how it could be used against us, it makes me feel more comfortable, because honestly, it brings way more good. I mean, there's folks who are going to say, well, Skynet, all that stuff, thanks, James Cameron. But it's one of those things that I really think so much more good's going to come out of it, unlike maybe guns, but that's a different story. Then it really could change the planet. To be quite honest, there's so much good that can come from AI. We just have to understand it.
How can organizations measure the ROI of AI in cybersecurity? It's always about, right, if I'm going to make this investment, how do I know it's worth it?
I was going to ask you that question. No, that's so many. We've had this kind of on us from an automation perspective as well, because before AI, we were still doing automation, and people were like, well, how do we measure the ROI on this?
Right.
And there is no standard mechanism. They're not going, in your MBA class, they're not going, here's the secret formula. So you've got to come up with that construct. And I think, the way that we've been doing it, and it obviously SG&A headcount and those kinds of things are important to organizations. We look at it, and when we do automation, when we use AI, it's minutes saved, and minutes turn into hours, and hours, 2,000 of those equal a head count. So that's something that makes sense from a finance perspective, right? And I can say, we make this investment in AI, my prediction is we won't need to add heads in 2025, or something along those lines. So you've got to be, security can't just sit in the dark rooms all day long. We got to get in the boardrooms. We got to understand how the business works. And I think that's a fair trade-off. So I got to do my homework and make sure that I can deliver back against those, those bets that I'm making. And then I've got to be able to be accountable for that. If we didn't hit those numbers, why didn't we? And how do we expect to do that? Nobody expects you to kind of demystify the mystic things right now, but it's a business conversation. And ROI is something everybody wants to know the answer to, and we got to figure out those right metrics. Security metrics aren't standard either, to be quite honest, and that's something that you've got to measure within an organization. The easiest way to do it is at the end of the year. Did we end up in the newspapers? No? Okay, great. But that's not a great metric, if you will. It's great in hindsight, but that's one of those things that it's got to be, you can't hide from the fact that you're going to have to show ROI. So you really need to embrace it. What are we doing? What investments are we making? And how are we becoming, are we able to, what I feel like, not just mitigate the risk and don't tell anybody, but empower the business to make decisions based on the risks that you've mitigated, right? Can we go into this market? Can we go into this line of business? Developing software, which we do a lot of, and we're using open source libraries. Do we know how many clients use those? Those kinds of things are important ways that security can empower the business that I don't think a lot of security professionals are kind of thinking like a business person, and that really is meaningful to the business.
This sounds like a lot, and you've mentioned a few times where there's very specific skills that need to be required. It's potentially a large team with in-depth knowledge, right? Sure. How much of this is really the responsibility of the organization, and how much of it do you really just need to find the right partner to handle this for you?
Great point. I always say, you've got to decide what you want to be in the business of doing, right? And that's kind of articulated by the business, right? Not necessarily the security, the CISO or the security team. But I think you've got to be very aware there are certain aspects that really add no value back to your organization from a security perspective. So letting somebody aggregate all of certain types of data and then feed you the result, a lot of people think that's a great model. I think that's a great model. So it's one of those things where you've got to figure out if you can only afford a couple of key heads to do certain things within your organization, people that know your business, that have been there for a while, that are those generalists that I talked about that can go across the whole platform and the business. Those are the people that you don't want to have doing day-to-day drudgery, soul-crushing work. That is definitely something that high-speed, low-drag entities that do this stuff, like Insight, can take care of that legwork for you and then basically give you the result and allow you to make those decisions or act upon that information that they've given you. I always think that's a good model because there is no, in my opinion, there's no badge of honor that you wear for doing the complete thing. The badge of honor that you wear is being able to empower the business, being able to show the results that you said you were going to show. And at the end of the day, to do it in a profitable way or a way that is not causing the business to have to not be able to invest because they have to invest somewhere else. It's always a smart way. And I think you have to think every day about those things. It's not like you make up your mind one day and you don't think about it again. You've got to think about, should I be in the business of this? Should I, Insight's managed services does some of my security. Of course they should. I mean, why should we do that twice? And I think you've got to think about, does that make us less of a security team? Absolutely not. It makes us an augmented team that has people very focused with the right tool sets, forward that stuff to us. I always think it's a good plan.
But the droids do the drudgery.
Those are the droids you're looking for.
I just want to close with one last question, because we touched on this earlier about it's important to train your teams to defend against an attack. What happens the moment after that attack takes place, that ransomware threat comes through? Does AI have a role in the aftermath?
I think AI has a role in getting you to the point of you knowing that that attack has taken place.
Shields up. We know it's there.
That's right. I mean, unfortunately, I heard an interesting stat. I can't remember the exact stat, but it was a surprising percentage of organizations that didn't know that they had a ransomware attack until they saw the note. Which meant there were your stuff's been encrypted at that point. You're in a bad situation. There were all of these opportunities to have detected that way before you find the note, right? And that's a stat that makes me uncomfortable, right? It's one of those things where I think AI, leveraging AI appropriately, there was the identify, there was the protect, detect, respond, and recover. All of those things before that whole recovery operation is in place. There were opportunities in all of those places to leverage AI to get you closer to as real time as you can. Hopefully you're never going to have that event if it's deployed, but I'm not saying everybody's or anybody's immune from this. I'm just saying that the quicker that you can react, the quicker you are to dealing with a worse situation. You're going to lose. It's just how bad you're going to lose at that point. And AI can definitely help you get ahead of that.
Jason, thank you very much for your insights today. It was a great conversation.
My pleasure.
For more information, just visit insight.com/techjournal.